Whenever you're ready.
Okay. Good morning, you guys. I'm going to be responding to my claim today, or their claim today, that zoos and aquariums are often criticized and after time debated on whether they should operate. While zoos were one time conceptualized as a form of entertainment to the public, they have evolved into a source of education, conservation, and play an important role in wildlife research. Their second claim was that it is improving global biodiversity by funding animals which protect animal. And the third one is that facilities breed animals for profit are expected to comply with the Animal Welfare Act. So my first response to it is, when I'm reading the claim, I go back to where it says that zoos have evolved into a source of education, conservation, and play an important role in wildlife research. Based on National Geographic, there's 10,000 zoos and aquariums in the United States. 2,230 of them are being used for research and for educational purposes. But that's leaving 7,770 of them just for the use of entertainment. With the claim that they're using to maintain that they're being used for captive breeding and reproduction programs and zoos have restored the population of certain animals. In the first speech, they gave an example of the Arizona Zoo that was using that they were taking animals and reproducing them that were going to be close to extinct. But when I go back to the place, when I go to the website, the zoo, their main mission is to provide an experience that inspires people and motivates them to care for the natural world. So they are helping, but in reality, that their main goal is that you'll come and see the animals and feel bad for them and want to see better in the way that we treat animals and the way that we are pretty much just like our environment and how we're going to do what to help the animals. The second claim is that there is providing a global biodiversity by funding projects by funding projects for the animals. We review that in the impact of the modern humans, that biodiversity is a really big problem in our day and age right now. But in reality, that there's lots of things that are causing that, like habit change, pollution, and climate change. We discussed that overlying causes such as geographic growth and resources use and review projects. We identify successful and opportunities in biodiversity and management and highlight gaps in biodiversity. We discuss how the geosystem frameworks can be used to identify undesirable biodiversity change and efforts. So I feel like when saying that helping the animals is going to change the global biodiversity, I feel like there's a lot more we could be doing other than having some animals be in a zoo and hope that they'll reproduce. And if we're going to be using our money to do that, I feel like we could be using our money in different ways that have more of an impact than funding for animals. And then the third claim that the animals have to be used that they have to use the Welfare Act for the safety of the animals. The Welfare Act was produced in 1966, but was last updated in 2013, changing a few words here and there. The act itself is that the term animal, meaning any live or dead dog, cat, non-human primary guinea pig, hamster, rabbit, or such as other wormed animals, are intended for use for research, testing, experiments, or exhibiting purposes. So the whole entire act is pretty much saying that you can't be testing on certain things, and it does allow you to test on rats and things that they do test on, but there's no actual law saying that animals need to be given a certain amount of space or need to be treated or need to be fed a certain amount of time. That is just based on the zoos. So in conclusion, zoos there is some zoos that are helping and are doing their best to protect animals, but for the most part, animals are being used for educational purpose, or for entertainment purposes, sorry. And there's no real evidence that they're helping the environment and saving animals as much as they could be. I'm sorry.
Not your fault.
Because I sat in
It disappeared.
Yeah.
The
camera didn't need it.
He didn't want to sit next to us anymore. He said he didn't want to sit next to us anymore. But the camera did.
Well, the structural stuff is set up at the beginning pretty clearly, at least what the advocates' arguments were. It did sound like there were multiple parts in that first section that were going to get separate treatment, and maybe that's why it seems a little confusing later on when you're responding to those points, because it felt like I got two number 2 sections, and maybe that whole first number 2 section was really responding to something in that first point. It was a little unclear. The argument about zoos and what functions they perform, you do suggest that zoos, only a limited number of zoos engage in the kinds of activities that the advocate is talking about, and you came up with a statistic about 2,230 of the zoos of the 10,000 that exist here are actually doing something, and the others are mostly just for entertainment purposes. It was a little unclear if that was a direct quote, and I think you're drawing some inferences from this information that are probably pretty impressive for the position that you're taking, but it feels like there's not quite as much information in that quote as we need to arrive at the conclusion that you're arriving at. You got a little bit lost at this point, and maybe that's where the organizational issues started to break down a bit, because I did feel like I thought you were moving to a second point, but it really appears like there's an expansion on what the original point was. You talk about the advocate mentioned the captive breeding program, and there's a discussion of what Arizona's doing. And your response to this is mostly just, well, their main mission is to inspire. Okay, but that doesn't suggest that they aren't doing these captive breeding things and that it isn't having any help. The fact that their main mission is something else, I'm not sure discounts whatever other actions that they're taking, and that seemed like a strange inference to draw from that particular situation. And then we get to the second point, where you're talking about biodiversity and you're talking about funding, and I couldn't really follow exactly what you were saying here. It was a little bit confusing. Having presented all of this information that you've got there, I don't know what it all means. I think your implication is that money is flowing into these places and it's not necessarily going to the issues of biodiversity that might need the most amount of attention, or that we're, in essence, the zoos are a drain on resources, and there are more appropriate ways that those resources could be applied. But that wasn't as clear as it needed to be, and I think that you need to kind of look back at that argument and find a more effective way of expressing what your position is on that. The criticism of the Animal Welfare Act mostly seems to be suggesting that the Act doesn't really have any guidelines or criteria for the care and treatment of animals, particularly animals in zoos. And the sections that you read are a little abstract. You actually are kind of defining mostly what animals are covered by this without necessarily giving us the details of the Act. I don't know how long the Act is. I know it's been around since 1966, but I don't know how many pages it is. I don't know what the guidelines and procedures are on that. I assume that there might be animal activists who have criticisms of this. I'd always maybe hesitate to use some sources because I think that that's a little bit problematic. the PETA people are a little crazy, so I'd be worried about that. But there are others who criticize the Animal Welfare Act as not providing the kinds of things that you're talking about, and especially when it comes to zoos. I swear it seems like there's a protest at the LA Zoo every year or every other year about something that's going on with the elephants not having enough space, or the tigers being fed the wrong kind of food or something like that. I think you needed to maybe find a little bit more information like that and say, look, and the federal government and agencies that supposedly apply the Animal Welfare Act are largely powerless in those circumstances to do anything about those things. And I know that stuff's not hard to find because my cousin is always posting that crazy stuff on Facebook. If I see one more story about how sad the elephants are, I'm going to scream. All right, thank you.